Mr. President, can this be over now? Have the American people suffered enough? Or do Democrats need more? Democrats have snarled air traffic, they've damaged small businesses, they've left federal workers in line at food banks, they've jeopardized food assistance. Food assistance, Mr. President, for 40 million Americans. Are they satisfied now? Or does the far left want more? Surely Democrats have hit enough milestones. The election is over. Democrats now have the extremely dubious honor of being responsible for the longest government shutdown in American history. So the question is, Mr. President, can the American people get a break now? Democrats should be embarrassed. Embarrassed that federal workers are lining up at food banks and missing bills and in danger of losing homes or cars because Democrats can't summon enough members to support a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution. That's right, Mr. President, a clean, nonpartisan funding bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. We've not asked Democrats to support a single new Republican policy. We haven't asked them to support a single partisan policy rider. We simply asked them to extend current funding levels for a few weeks so that we could have time to do bipartisan work on appropriations bills. But Democrats couldn't take yes for an answer. And on the subject of appropriations, Mr. President, if any Democrats cherish the faintest hope of still funding the government through a full-year appropriations process, a process that they've displayed, or I should say delayed, for 5 weeks and counting, they should vote for the clean, nonpartisan CR today. Mr. President, I realize that Democrats have been under a lot of pressure from their far-left base to keep the shutdown going. And I assume that it was pressure from Democrats' far-left base that saw the Democrat leader flip his position on shutdowns 180 degrees in the space of just 6 months. And I realize that there are a number of Democrats in the Senate who are not just yielding to pressure from the far left, but are themselves members of the far left and are happy to continue the shutdown forever, if it means somehow sticking it, they think, to President Trump. But I'm hoping there are still Democrats out there who can see beyond the political extremism of their leftist base. And I hope there are some Democrats who can take an honest look at the widespread damage that their shutdown is doing and say enough is enough. Thanksgiving is rapidly approaching. Parents are starting to think about what they're going to put under the tree. Do Democrats still want federal employees lining up at food banks at Thanksgiving? At Christmas? And on the topic of the holidays, it's an open question whether people will be able to spend it with their families this year if the shutdown continues. Air traffic has been snarled for weeks as a result of Democrat shutdown, and things are getting worse. The Transportation Secretary just announced yesterday that the government may be forced to close parts of our airspace if the shutdown continues into next week. Close airspace, Mr. President. Think about that. And I could go on. I could talk about the unions asking Democrats to end this shutdown and support a clean continuing resolution. I could talk about the business organizations making the same request. I could read the headlines about Head Start preschools closing and SNAP recipients who are worried about their benefits and National Guard units who aren't training, and on and on. Every single thing as a result of Democrats' decision to shut down the government more than 5 weeks ago. But surely, Mr. President, surely, there are at least some Democrat senators who can see this for themselves. See this for themselves and realize it is past time to end this before the damage gets even worse. Mr. President, it's day 36 of Democrats' shutdown. Day 36. How much longer are Democrats going to make the American people suffer? Mr. President, I yield the floor.
And last night was a great night for America and a 5-alarm fire for Donald Trump and Republicans. The Republicans' high-cost House is on fire, and they've only got themselves to blame. As loudly and clearly as they could have, the American people said last night, enough is enough. Enough with Donald Trump's tariffs, which are overwhelmingly being paid for by working people and small businesses. Enough with Republicans' relentless attack on health care, where people are seeing their premiums go up by thousands of dollars, even each month, and they may have to be without health care altogether. Last night was a sign that if Republicans continue with their failed policies, their majorities are at risk, including here in this Senate chamber. The election showed that Democratic control of the Senate is much closer than people and prognosticators realize. So let me say it again. Republicans' high-cost House is on fire, and they've only got themselves to blame. And by the way, that's not just my opinion. It's Donald Trump's opinion. Last night, he said that the shutdown is a negative factor for the Republicans. When addressing why he had lost, this is what Trump said. The shutdown was a big factor, negative for Republicans. And let me read what Trump said last night. He said, this is Donald Trump speaking, Trump wasn't on the ballot, and the shutdown were the two reasons Republicans lost elections tonight. That's what Trump said. Trump admits that the Republican shutdown is hurting him and his party. The president is right. Americans realize Republicans are responsible for this awful shutdown, now the longest officially in history. What a shameless milestone. Donald Trump has now presided over the longest and second longest shutdowns ever, and he only has himself to blame. When Leader Jeffries and I met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office last month, we warned him that this would happen. We warned the president of the consequences of ignoring Democrats, ignoring the American people, ignoring the health care crisis. We warned the president that ignoring Democrats and insisting on zero negotiations was a recipe for disaster and would come back to haunt him. Well, Republicans shouldn't ignore us anymore, for their own good and the country's good. So this morning, Leader Jeffries and I once again demanded a meeting with the president. It's time to sit down and negotiate with Democrats to bring this Republican shutdown to an end, we told the president. We've been asking for a meeting for weeks and even months. But now the election results ought to send a much-needed bolt of lightning to Donald Trump that he should meet with us to end this crisis, his shutdown, which he admits hurt him badly in the election. It's time to hold a bipartisan meeting of legislative leaders to reopen the government. It's time to fix the ACA premium emergency that is now upon us, and Democrats are ready to meet anytime, anywhere, any place. Donald Trump ignores us at his own political peril, because the takeaway from last night was simply unmistakable. Democrats swept in states last night across the country, red and blue alike. Democrats won overwhelmingly by more than anyone ever thought in New Jersey and Virginia. Democrats won in Mississippi and won in New York, in Pennsylvania, and in Georgia. Democrats won in statewide races, but it went deeper than that. We won in lots of local races, too. Mayoral races, state Supreme Court races, ballot measures, and even historic swings in the Georgia Public Service Commission, where 2 Democrats were elected, statewide, I believe. Why did Democrats do so well? Because Americans are fed up with Republicans shooting their costs through the roof, particularly on health care, on tariffs, on their electric bills. And Americans saw that Democrats are the ones fighting for them, fighting for lower health care costs, fighting for working families. And while all this is happening, what is Donald Trump doing? Depriving hungry Americans of their SNAP benefits? Telling children, hungry children, we're going to cut off your food and use you as a pawn in this shutdown which the Republicans have caused? Telling the elderly who depend on that SNAP money to adequately feed themselves, the heck with you? Telling a veteran who has PTSD or a worker who is unemployed that we're not going to give you food? How callous, how cruel, how mean, how vindictive, and how calculatingly wrong. Americans saw the contrast between Democrats and Republicans in full effect last night. They saw that Trump is treating Americans, particularly needy Americans, as political pawns during the shutdown. One end of the country to the other, including battleground states, Democrats, independents, and even Republicans, rejected Donald Trump's policies and rejected hard right elected officials. And let me say something else. After last night, Donald Trump ought to learn that his petty vindictiveness doesn't work. Here's one glaring example. He tried to axe federal funding for the Gateway Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, the biggest public works project in the country, employing tens of thousands of workers and ensuring continued prosperity and good transportation in the entire Northeast corridor. But he axed the funds, and his axing the funds was aimed, in his mind, at Democratic leaders like Leader Jeffries and me. In the end, it totally backfired and became a big factor for voters making their decisions in New Jersey and electing Mikey Sherrill by an amazing 13 percentage points. And one of the main issues in that campaign was Donald Trump's vindictiveness in cutting off this tunnel and trying to use it, again, and all the workers, as a hostage. So again, let me say it again. Last night serves as a 5-alarm fire for Republicans, a warning from the American people. They're tired of Donald Trump raising people's costs, raising health care costs, ignoring the needs of working people. The right way forward for Republicans and for all of America is to negotiate with Democrats to reopen the government and extend the ACA premium tax credits. The American people have spoken. Enough is enough. And on SCOTUS and tariffs, which is being argued by the Supreme Court right now as we speak. After an overwhelming rejection of the Trump Republican agenda at the polls, this morning, Donald Trump's lawyers are at the Supreme Court trying to argue his global tariffs are legal. They are illegal. They're arguing they're legal. It's hard to imagine a worse morning after for Donald Trump and Republicans than to have to go to the Supreme Court and defend these tariffs, which are dramatically raising Americans' costs. And that's why Republicans were so shellacked last night. And it led, and maybe the Supreme Court, actually, maybe the Supreme Court will put Donald Trump and Republicans out of their tariff misery by declaring Trump's tariffs illegal, which of course we know they are. Because Donald Trump's tariffs have been one of the biggest tax hikes on American families in recent memory. Poll after poll shows that Americans are paying more at the grocery store. They blame Trump for the rising prices, and they disapprove of his tariffs. The Supreme Court should do the right thing and strike down Trump's tariffs before those tariffs spiral our economy into even a bigger crisis. And if our democracy is to mean anything at all, we should remember the Constitution is clear as a bell, clear as a Liberty Bell. The power to tax and tariff resides in Congress, not the president, not by unilateral power, not based on some BS emergency declaration. Donald Trump is not a king. He's bound by the Constitution and by his oath to protect the American people and uphold the rule of law. Today, The court should make clear that Donald Trump is not above the law. I yield the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you this morning. Good morning. Joining us today, as you can see, are some of the rising stars in our party. These are Republican members of the sophomore class. They're in their second term. Many of them have been working so hard for the last several weeks in their districts, trying to help their constituents navigate the chaoses that have been created by the Democrat shutdown. We're now on day 36, and it is a sad landmark in our history. This is the longest shutdown of any government in our history. And they've also made history in a number of ways, which we've recounted every day in our daily press conferences. Remember, this is the first time in the history of America that any party has had the audacity to close down the government over a totally clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution. I said yesterday, and I'm being honest, none of us imagined that we would be here at this moment. We couldn't have imagined that Democrats would be willing to force families to go hungry and workers to miss paychecks for 5 weeks on end, 50 days plus, and we never did imagine that they would be willing to use the pain of American families with such reckless disregard. But that is what we are seeing, and it is unconscionable. Despite the 15 opportunities they have now had to reopen the government, they have voted 15 times to keep it closed. That is the number that everyone has to pay attention to. All the Americans who are hurting because of this. They need to understand Republicans have voted 15 times to open your government, and the Democrats have voted 15 times to close it. They voted to deny paychecks to workers, to stop the flow of SNAP funds to hungry families, and all the rest. And still, somehow, they have the audacity to go on national television and gaslight the American people and try to pretend that somehow the Republican Party has some blame in this. It's the most outrageous example of political gaslighting that we have ever seen. And day after day, they have claimed, without any merit at all, this shutdown is somehow about health care. It's a blatant lie, and they know it. They tried to string together two totally unrelated issues: the expiration of the Obamacare COVID subsidies and the basic funding of the federal government. Those are two totally distinct things. Republicans have always been willing to have a conversation about the COVID-era subsidies and how to make Obamacare and health care more affordable. But we will not, and we should not do so as hostages in their political game. It was in no way necessary or appropriate to shut down the government in order to have bipartisan discussions about the subsidies. The reality is the Democrats could have avoided all of this chaos and all the pain, everything they've inflicted on American families, by simply voting to back the clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution, the 24-page simple document, just as they did 13 times under the Biden administration. They could have passed that 47 days ago. After the House did it, we did our work and sent it over there. And we would have had all these negotiations and continued. I'm going to wrap this up and tell you again why. The big question is why. Why would the Democrats have the audacity to do this? As we summarized so simply yesterday, and we will do so every day, they are motivated out of fear. The Democrats shut down the government out of fear. They have never been more afraid at any point than they are right now. They know, as we all do, what their own polls show. The leadership of the Democratic Party is the most unpopular with members of their own Democratic base. And we saw that in the elections last night. The old guard is desperately trying to use this shutdown to show the radical Marxist wing of their party that they can look tough to President Trump. That's because the new power center of the left isn't the moderates. It's the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders and the Mamdanis of the party. It's the activists who believe capitalism is evil, who disdain the founding principles of their own country. They claim that the salvation of our nation will be brought about by bigger government and more bureaucracy. Look what happened in New York City last night. For the first time in American history, an avowed, openly proclaimed socialist has been elected as the mayor of America's largest city. Zoran Mandami is without a doubt the biggest win for socialism in the history of the country, and it is the biggest loss for the American people. He is truly a committed Marxist. And the results of that race tell you everything you need to know about where the Democrats and their party are headed. From the backbench to their leadership, Democrats have fallen in line behind the socialist candidates. Hakeem Jeffries, as you know, is the highest-ranking Democrat in the House. He gave his full blessing to Mamdani and his socialist agenda. Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking Democrat in the Senate and the highest-ranking Jewish leader in America, flirted with endorsing Mamdani all the way to the bitter end. Never mind the fact that Zoran has embraced anti-Semitic rhetoric and promised to arrest the Prime Minister of Israel if he visits New York City again. And then there's President Obama, who called Mamdani over the weekend to extend his praise and act as a sounding board for the young socialist. You can't make this stuff up. The man who made health care unaffordable with his own socialist scheme is advising the man whose false promises will surely make life unlivable for millions of New Yorkers who cannot afford to flee the city. As we said from this podium every morning, we talk about Mamdani for two reasons. It's a bellwether, because House Democrats, many of whom represent districts with much less blue than New York City, have embraced him with open arms. And because his brand of Marxism is truly a bellwether for the Democrats nationwide. We pointed out that other major metropolitan areas in the country are facing the same threat with candidates similar to Mamdani. And we're going to continue to call out their effort to mainstream and normalize socialism and Marxism in America. Working families watching this play out have a right to know that socialism and communism are not just confined in New York City. They are quickly coming to a town near you unless you stand up and let your voice of common sense be heard. While Democrats hitch their wagon to the socialist agenda, Republicans are going to continue to act in good faith on behalf of hardworking Americans. And we will remind a new generation of Americans about the painful and inescapable realities of history. We'll have much more to say about this in the days ahead. There were no surprises last night. I'll just summarize on the election, and then I'll yield to some of our sophomore stars here. There's no surprises. What happened last night was blue states and blue cities voted blue. We all saw that coming. And no one should read too much into last night's election results. Off-year elections are not indicative of what's to come. That's what history teaches us. By the way, it's worthy of note that Zoran Mamdani himself only received a little over 1 million votes, 1,036,000 votes. There are 8.3 million residents in New York City. 8.5 million actually is the number, I think. So about 12% of the city voted to turn their city over to the communists. We'll see how that works out. The lesson is that common sense Americans have to stay informed, you have to stay engaged, and you have to vote and let your voice be heard. But back to the urgent issue of this moment. Unlike our Democrat friends, Republicans know there's no prize for the milestone we've hit today. No one wins in a government shutdown. We pray that Democrats wake up to that truth very soon. We are very hopeful that they will come to their senses and help us to reopen the government. Remember, it's about math. We have to have 60 votes in the Senate, and we only have 53 Republicans. The entire country is waiting and calling on Democrats to put their political fight aside and open the government. Until they do that and do the right thing, House Republicans will continue to do what we've done since day one, and that is helping our constituents navigate the chaos and confusion of the Democrat shutdown back in our districts.
Last night was a big night for the American people, and of course a big night for the Democratic Party and our candidates who were successful all across the country in making it clear to the American people that we're going to fight to lower the high cost of living, to stand up for them, improve their quality of life, address the Republican health care crisis, and push back against the extremism that is being unleashed with record speed on the American people. It's clear that last night was also a decisive repudiation of Donald Trump and failed Republican policies. America is too expensive. The cost of living is way too high. Donald Trump and Republicans promised that they would lower costs on day one. Costs aren't going down. They are going up. Inflation is going up. Housing costs out of control. Grocery costs out of control. child care costs out of control, electricity prices through the roof. And now that we are in day 36 of the Trump Republican shutdown, it's clear that because of the Republican refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, tens of millions of Americans are about to dramatically experience increases in their premiums, copays, and deductibles, which will make it unaffordable for them, their children, and their families to go see a doctor when they need one. House Democrats are going to continue to stand on the side of the American people in fighting to lower the high cost of living, fix our broken healthcare system that Republicans are decimating, and clean up corruption so we can deliver a country that actually works for working class Americans, for middle class Americans, and for everyday Americans. Our position as House Democrats, working closely with our friends and colleagues on the other side of the Capitol, Senate Democrats, remains the same. Earlier today, Leader Schumer and I demanded a meeting with Donald Trump. He needs to get off the sidelines and get in the game. Because until he does, this government will remain shut down. Mike Johnson and John Thune have zero authority to act on their own. And over the last 36 days, Donald Trump has been too busy throwing parties designed to elevate the lifestyles of the rich and shameless. He's been too busy on the golf course. He's been too busy destroying half the White House. And he's been too busy finding $40 billion for the people of Argentina, and yet can't find a dime to prevent children in this country from going hungry. The American people have had enough. And the results last night across the country have made that clear.